Hi, everybody. This week we are going to be learning about the digestive system. So last week and the week before, we did the immune system, and I think that's the most complicated lecture that we have. So even combined with AMP1, I think the immune system is pretty complicated. So there's a lot going on. So the digestive system, luckily, you got the hard part done. It's a little easier. I think it's easier, and I think it's fun a little get to relax the mind a little bit and have a little fun. I think it's fascinating. Okay, so we will be talking about the digestive system. And then we'll actually be doing it in 2 weeks. And also to give you a little bit more of a breather. So I know sometimes we go through some of the material and there's a lot to learn in such a short period of time. So it's kind of a mid semester breath. So you can kind of take a breath. So we'll take 2 weeks to do the digestive system. Okay. So the digestive system is actually one long tube, and it begins in the mouth, and it goes down the esophagus, down the pharynx and the esophagus, and then it comes behind the liver into the stomach and into the small intestine, the large intestine, and then it's removed from the body and the rectum and anus. And so the purpose of the digestive system is to get the nutrients from the food. Um, so it does that in several different steps. So first we have to break everything down, and then we're going to grab the nutrients. So the major place where nutrients are absorbed are in the small intestine, and the stomach and the mouth. A lot of the breaking of the food occurs. Okay. But we also have a lot of accessory organs that are important. We have the salivary glands, and we'll talk about each of these as well. The liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. Okay. But everywhere along the digestive system, we have different layers. Sometimes the layers can be quite thick and others a little bit thinner. So the layers are the mucosa, the submucosa, and the muscularis, and the serosus. So here we have the mucosa. So it's mucousy. So this is where kind of mucousy. The submucosa is right underneath. Maybe this one you could see a little bit better. And then we have the muscularis, which is a smooth muscle. So a big part of the digestive system is moving the food along. And there's different types of movement we'll learn and how the body actually moves food in different ways through the digestive system. And then the serosa, which is also called the visceral peritoneum. Okay. So we have these 4 different layers in the digestive system. We actually have billions of neurons that control the digestive system, and it has its whole own unique digestive system called the enteric digestive system. And you're not conscious of it. So you have no control over how fast you can move the food through or how slow. It's actually really tightly controlled. So if once food gets in the stomach, it's actually going to start to tell the rest of the digestive system, okay, get ready, here comes food. And there's a lot of hormones too that are released that help not only signal your digestive system, but also tell your brain, because the brain gut connection is very important. You have to know when you're hungry, and you have to know when you're not hungry. I know in this culture, that sometimes it's not clear for some people, or some people, many people eat for other reasons. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. So we have hundreds of millions of neurons, even some people say a billion neurons. And that serotonin is a very important neurotransmitter. Yeah, and it's a complex, and we're learning more about hormones. So we're still discovering hormones of the gut. That's pretty fascinating. Okay, so we will begin with the mouth. So actually your digestive system actually even begins even before you take that first bite. So if you ever smelt like somebody's cooking, or like sometimes I was just walking the other day and by a restaurant, I was like, wow, that smells so good. So the smell goes into your brain, and that can actually start getting your tummy rumbling. So if you ever like downstairs studying, and then you could smell somebody cooking. You're like, oh, that smells so good. You can feel your tummy rumbling, and then it's time for dinner. Okay, so it can start a little bit beforehand, so the anticipation with the smell. But then once you get the food in your mouth, you chew it, obviously, with different teeth, and different teeth have different roles. So the incisors are for biting, so they're very sharp. The canines are for kind of eating meat, like just like dogs or canines. And then the molars are for grinding food. So actually, it's very important to have good dental health to be able to eat. And then some people who are elderly, especially, don't have good teeth, might have lost their teeth along the way, so it's hard for them to eat very well. Also, the tongue is very important. Taste is very important. So we can tell a lot about the food by the taste. So if something is bitter, it's probably poisonous. If something is sour, it's probably gone bad. So it's really important to taste the food before you put it in our body, because otherwise, you might have food poisoning. That would be good. Okay. So we taste with our tongue, we chew with our teeth, and then we're also going to be releasing saliva from our salivary glands. And the saliva does a lot of different things. It actually has enzymes, so we're going to break down the food right away. And it also is important, saliva is also important for keeping our mouth moist. And if you ever had dry mouth, sometimes when I get nervous, my mouth gets dry and it's hard to talk. So you know how hard it is to talk without saliva. And also it has a little bit of antimicrobial, so it does a lot of things. So it begins to, so even as we put it in our mouth, we're already starting to break down food between chewing and the enzymes in saliva. And then we taste. And then we begin to swallow. And you probably never thought about how complicated swallowing is, but it actually is pretty complicated. So we're going to chew, and then we're going to put it back in the back of our throat. And that is going to start an automatic process. So once it's kind of the back of our throat and we swallow, after that it's more subconscious and we don't have any control of that. So you push the bolus in the back of the throat, and then there's this little flap here called the epiglottis, and you can see that it's open here and closed here. And then the food can actually go through. And this is really important because this will go to the lungs. So I'm sure we all have went down the wrong tube, and so that's not good. So that's because the epiglottis was kind of not in the right position. So the bolus comes back, and the epiglottis covers the esophagus, so it doesn't go so it doesn't go into the lungs. It doesn't cover the esophagus; it goes down. And then we have the esophageal phase. And then we're going to have peristalsis. I can't talk today. I don't know why. So peristalsis. So it moves the food along. So kind of like squeezing, the toothpaste. Like push at one end and you push it all the way forward. So, and that's how it's moved into the stomach. And then it reaches the stomach. And there's a little sphincter here that opens up and the food enters the stomach. Okay. So now we get in the stomach. And there are different parts to the stomach. So food comes in from the esophagus here. And then it's kind of like a J shape here. And inside you can see all these little wrinkles in there. So it's not a very smooth organ inside. It has a lot of wrinkles and a lot of different cells that secrete different things. So we need to secrete acid. And so it's hydrochloric acid. So it's very acidic, and that helps break down the food. We also secrete some digestive enzymes that will break food down even a little bit more. So in addition to chemical breakdown, we also have physical breakdown. So your stomach, you can see, has 3 different angles of muscles. And that's great because it's going to churn, so it's going to squeeze. So it squeezes in different ways, kind of moving the food both against the wall of the stomach and uh, having it interact with the enzymes and acids. So we're just going to kind of break it down both mechanically and chemically until it gets smaller and smaller. Um, and and stomach food can stay in the stomach from a couple hours to about 6 hours, and it depends on what is actually in the food you eat. So if you have a little bit of fat, um, the food is actually going to stay in your stomach a little bit longer than if you just had all carbs, carbohydrates, or proteins. So the stomach also senses what kind of food is in there. And then right here, it's going to tell it, okay, it's time to go. So it kind of might release a lot or a little bit at a time, depending on how much you have in here. So it's pretty complicated. So it kind of is also signaling, some hormones are also released to signal your brain, like, okay, I'm full or I'm hungry. So there's also a lot of connection between the stomach and the brain. Okay, and then it slowly releases a little bit out into the small intestine. But there's a couple things that are absorbed in the stomach. One is water. Another one is alcohol. So if you drink on an empty stomach, you might feel a little more tipsier than if you had a full meal. And that's because the alcohol can get absorbed right away through the stomach. It does get mostly absorbed in the small intestine, but right away in the stomach. And then also a lot of medications are formulated so it gets absorbed right into from the stomach too. Otherwise, you have to wait for it to go into the small intestine, go into the blood, and then go into the liver and then the body. And that might take so much time. So especially aspirins and other medications are fast absorbing right from the stomach. Okay. Okay, so then it goes from the small intestine, from the stomach into the small intestine. And right at the very opening, there's a gland called the pancreas. And the pancreas has two functions. It releases digestive enzymes, um, and it neutralizes the food here. And it also releases insulin to help regulate sugar levels. So right now we're just talking about this part of it. So this is the pancreas, and it has different cells of the pancreas. We have the pancreatic islet cells, the endocrine, so it has endocrine function and an exocrine function. Okay, so it's actually pretty complicated and very important. So right here is where a buffer is released and to neutralize, because you don't want that hydrochloric acid to go into your small intestine. So immediately that acid is neutralized, and we're adding a lot of digestive enzymes. Okay. And then it continues into the small intestine. Well, I guess we'll talk about the liver too. So another important organ is the liver. And that does a lot of different things. One of the important things it does is it's the site of drug and alcohol detoxification. So if you take any medications or drugs or drink, then the liver has to work at getting rid of all that material and neutralizing it, and then you eliminate through urination. It also makes bile. So bile is very important for the digestion of fats. So if you remember, fats don't like water. They're hydrophobic. So what bile does is it kind of emulsifies the fat. So it takes the fat and it's going to kind of add a lot of proteins, make it into a little smaller micelle, and make it a little bit more hydrophilic, so it's able to be digested. So bile is made in the liver but stored in the gallbladder. And that's a little sac that's found near the liver. And that also is released into the small intestine, especially when you have fat. So if you ate a fatty meal, that will signal to the gallbladder to release gall so that you can get the fat absorbed. Okay, we'll stop here and I'll start a new tape.